Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today we are returning back to the streets in Cauldron as we take a look at the 7th installment in the Shackled City Adventure Path. Today we are looking at Lords of Oblivion. Lords of Oblivion was first published in Dungeon Magazine issue 111, which released back in June of 2004, so quite a long time ago at this the time that I'm recording this, like almost 16 years at this point. So, the adventure is designed for a group of 4 characters around 15th or 13th level, and they should reach 15th level by the time that the campaign ends. This takes place relatively soon after the events of Secrets of the Soul Pillars. However, there may be a little bit of a gap that you could sort of insert into the story at that point. However, things are, to quote Jim Ross, business is about to pick up in terms of the pacing of this campaign from this point through to the conclusion. The campaign, or this adventure, begins with the characters being contacted by the leader of an organization known as the Striders of Farlangen. They're a group of travelers that essentially try to maintain the balance of natural order in the regions that they operate in. They sort of look to protect themselves against extraplanar threats, essentially. The characters have actually been interacting with the Striders, or have had the potential to operate and work alongside the Striders, since the very beginning of the campaign, all the way back in Life's Bazaar, the very first installment, in which the 2 half-elven agents of Ferio Elegoth and Felian Shard team up with the party to sort of find out what's been happening with all these missing individuals that were happening in the town. So that was back then. At this point in time, however, they are contacted by Marithan. Again, he's the leader. He's an elf or a half-elf. That actually masquerades or uses, he's a half-elf, uses a hat of a disguise to appear as a dwarf, and it's always kind of funny, because he always maintains that appearance, even when dealing with the PCs, which I think is interesting. Another thing to note about the Striders is that Marithan is able to maintain telepathic bonds with several of the members of his organizations. He summons a party because one of their half-elf members, by the name of Skriol, was captured while spying on House Ravati. So that is one of the noble houses one of the major nobles that resides in Cauldron. While he was sort of spying on this house, he was ambushed by members of the Last Laugh Thieves Guild, and he's currently being held in one of their safe houses. So he wants the characters to rescue their agent, because it's the right thing to do, I guess, but also he has information that the party may want, and even though Marithan technically already knows it due to his telepathic bond, he would rather have his agent return safely before handing that information out, which is shrewd but makes sense. The member of the Striders of Farlangen is being held by, in particular, the NPC known as Jill. She is one of the higher ranking members of the Last Laugh Thieves Guild, and someone that the characters have also probably been interacting with, or at least been aware of since the very beginning of the campaign as well, because she was also a member, or an individual who was introduced in Life's Bazaar. Interestingly enough, both Life's Bazaar and this adventure were both written by Christopher Perkins, so it's kind of cool to see him reference back to his older adventures. So when the characters arrive, they can try to talk Jill down, especially if one of the player characters has the opportunity to have struck up a romance with her, something that is alluded to and something that is possible. However, if they fail, she does unfortunately cut the throat of the agent. However, he can either be raised or resurrected, or even just speak with dead can be used to get the information. Essentially, what this agent has found out is that the Lady Ravati has been entertaining quite a few unusual guests lately, including a lot of individuals of ill repute and ill manner. Essentially, she's been gathering a whole bunch of villains. At this point, the characters are sort of tasked with infiltrating her home to find out what's going on. Now, this can lead to just a knockdown, drag-out fight. However, if the characters use caution, they can actually overhear the meeting that's taking place with the Lady Ravati and all of her guests. This is essentially where she finally reveals the plot to the adventure that's been going on all along. Essentially, what happened is centuries ago, the Demodans from Carcery started mixing or breeding with the humanoids of the prime material plane in the Cauldron region, or more actively in the Cauldron region, and they've created sort of offspring. And as centuries have gone on, these offspring don't really show any outward signs of their mixed heritage. However, they do manifest this invisible birthmark known as the Carcerian eye. Essentially, it's an oval with an arrow pointing up, sort of going through the middle of it. In order to create a permanent portal that links Cauldron, or the prime material world, to the prison plane of Carcery, they need to sacrifice 13 of these Shackleborn. And they use this a ritual of planar junction essentially to do it. The Shackleborn are locked up in what are referred to as soul cages, a copy of which the player characters were able to recover in the previous adventure. So now they can finally learn what its purpose is, and that's to basically drain the energy, the life essence, out of the Shackleborn to create this portal. What happens next is up to the players. They can sort of sneak away, or they can confront all of the villains, and there are a lot of villains here. It's actually a pretty chaotic battle if the characters decide to confront all the villains that are here. However, luckily the magazine does do a very good job of giving you all of their tactics for a fair number of rounds to make things a lot easier. But once they deal with that and deal with the Lady Bravati herself, I call her the Lady Bravati because her name is very difficult to pronounce. Theophane. But the unique thing about her is that she actually has a beholder's eye grafted into the center of her forehead, which she hides with elegant headdresses or her hair or something to block it. But when the fight breaks out, she actually uses this to her full advantage, and it actually contains the inflict moderate wound spells. Once this situation is dealt with, one of the things that the characters learn is that Lady Ravati has been having several back and forths with the elven noble Volanthru, who is the individual who has stepped in to take over the government of Cauldron, given that the previous Lord Mayor seems to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Many think that he fled, but at this point it's starting to become obvious that that's not the case. And the next thing that happens is the characters go to Volanthru's home to confront him. And this is where they find that the manor, which does look like an elven noble's manor, actually hides a secret. And that secret is the subterranean lair of Oblivion. As the characters progress through, they have to overcome what are referred to as Oblivion doors. These are doors that have some pretty nasty traps on them that can only be overcome by casting a spell mirroring one of the eye rays effects that a beholder has into it. So that's an interesting sort of aspect or twist to the dungeon there. And eventually it all leads to the confrontation with Volanthru himself, who has actually undergone a ritual of his own to absorb the spirit or the essence of a Shator Demodan into him. So he actually has this very powerful being from this outer plane whose essence that he's absorbed into himself, and has given himself some pretty nasty abilities, such as the ability to use this caustic slime, I think it is, or paralyzing slime, sorry, that he can spit at the characters, and if they get stuck with it or they get hit with it and fail their fortitude saving throw, then they become paralyzed for 3d6 rounds, which can be pretty nasty, on top of just being a more powerful version of a standard beholder. And once the characters finally deal with Volanthru, they may think that all is well. However, it's definitely not, because suddenly the city of Cauldron itself begins to experience some minor tremors, which could indicate something far, far worse. And that's the premise, that's the synopsis of what happens in this adventure. And This was, and I know I've said this with some of the other ones, but this was one of my personal favorite installments in the adventure for one very, very interesting reason. And that reason is the reaction that I got from my players when they learned that Philanthro, this noble that's been someone they've been interacting with since very early on in the campaign, ended up being a beholder in disguise. So he's had the an alter self spell cast on him that allows him to assume his noble form, whereas he's been this beholder all along. Beholder, which by the way has the somewhat on the nose name of Orbius, but in my experience, what happened when I was running this is that when the players actually found out that Philanthro was this villain that they've been unfortunately unwittingly helping all along, they got really angry, and this fight was absolutely 100% personal. And I believe I told the story all the way back in the Zenith Trajectory video, but essentially what happened was they met with Philanthro. I never used his name Orbius in when the characters were interacting with him, because again, I thought it just seemed a little too on the nose and a little too obvious. So I split the name into his two aspects. So when he was in his elven form as this nobleman, he went by the name of Philanthro. And when he was in his natural form, he would refer to himself as Orbius. That way, it's maintaining the two separate personas and not giving too much away. Because if you use the word orb in someone's name, and the very first adventure had this beholder appearing out of nowhere, then two and two go together pretty quick. So I made the conscious decision to not use the Orbius name when referring to Philanthro as the Elven Lord. But what was interesting is when they were interacting with him, he was the one giving them payment for retrieving the Zenith Splinter Shield, the dwarven defender who went to the Underdark to try to cleanse it of evil, and unfortunately went a little insane in the process, and was also, as it turns out, one of the Shackleborn, and not only that, he was the last Shackleborn that was needed in order to start this lengthy ritual of planar junction. So the player characters actually ended up hand delivering the final part of the puzzle that these cage rights, the shadowy organization, needed to bring about their ultimate plan. So they were not happy with that. But when they dealt with Philanthro in the first place, they were suspicious. So I allowed them to make a sense motive check, and one player rolled one check, and he rolled poorly and knew he rolled poorly. And when I said he seems trustworthy, they simply went with it. And they would use him as a trusted informant or source of information throughout the entire campaign. In fact, when I was running it and the assassins struck, when they came back from the Occipitous, the lair of the abyss, in the Test of the Smoking Eye adventure, or sorry, at the end of the Test of the Smoking Eye, when they came back and were attacked by the assassins in Secrets of the Soul Pillars, they actually went to Philanthro for guidance and for information. And because Philanthro was annoyed that the assassination that he had ordered failed so spectacularly, and knowing that the High Priestess of the Cathedral of Ijos was already away and dealing with the cage rights, because she's one of their members, spoilers, that the incompetent Ike Iverson, the one who set those assassins. So Philanthro, in my campaign, was so annoyed at this guy's ineptitude that he sent the players at them. And he's the one that was responsible for the players discovering who it was that had ordered the assassins. And so, again, they really became, they came to trust him. And that was pretty recent as well. So when they found out that he was actually one of the villains and had been playing him the entire time, it was, like I said, they got pretty emotionally invested in tracking this guy down and destroying him. And the fight itself was pretty decent as well. Philanthro certainly put up a bit of a fight. I think he was able to chase one of the players off with his eye ray of fear, and I think he ended up paralyzing someone else. So it was a knockdown, drag-out fight. Overall, this was a very fun adventure to run. The giant melee with all the villains in Theophane Rivati's home was a challenging encounter to run, but again, the magazine does a very good job of giving the tactics of all the combatants involved, and there's like a dozen of them, I think, overall. Let's just count for a second here. So you have Rivati herself and her shield guardian, so that's 2. You have this dwarf fighter rogue, so that's 3. Another dwarf, or 2 dwarves actually. Dwarf fighter 6, so that's 5. A cleric of Nerul, so we got 6, 7 with a half-elf necromancer. Then we have Maud, the female half-elf vampire, although she was very passive in the fight and was more interested in simply slipping away. But we'll count her anyway, in case the players were able to cut her off, so we're up to 8 now. And then we have a tiefling sorcerer, so that is 9. Some babu demons, so that's 10, 11. The fiendish half-fiend human cleric, and a male ogre mage. Sorry. So yeah, there's about 13. There's about 14 or so combatants. But again, the vampire tried to get away, but it does do, like I said, a very good job of giving you the tactics for each of them, so you know how to run it pretty easily. And it was a tough fight, but it was a rewarding one to get through. And like I said, going through and trying to track down Valanthru after that was the highlight of the adventure for me, and just that moment of realization. So that is Lords of Oblivion, and like I said, things are about to get pretty rough from this point going forward. So the next installment should be, I believe, Foundation of Flame, I think, is the next one. But don't 100% quote me on that. Let me just look up quickly here if it shows what's to come in the next installment, because I do want to make sure that I get that right. But I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to worry about it too much here. But essentially, like I said, we are at the point where things are going to escalate very, very quickly. The rest of the campaign had a lot of potential downtime that took place between each of the adventures. In some cases, it felt like months had passed. So there was lots of time to sort of, for the characters to rest, to make acquaintances or make friends. And now at this point, we are getting into we're getting into third gear, I guess you could say. So things are about to get really, really chaotic over the next series of adventures. So if I had any complaints about this adventure, the only thing I can really say is that it kind of bothers me that it's not depicted on the cover like we had with all the other installments. The previous 6 installments of this adventure path all had the adventure itself depicted on the cover art. With the Secrets of the Soul Pillars, we had Vitrus Bale, the green dragon Dracolich. That was the guardian of Karan Kurul. Before that, we had a depiction of Akapitis for signs of the test of the smoking eye. Before that, we had Nabatheron, the Glabrazu, who was the lord of the Demon Scar. Before that, we had the Hulk Smash, the Umber Hulk Smash, which was the first encounter in the Zenith Trajectory adventure. We also had one of the members of the Ebon Triad, who had stolen the wands of water control during the Flood Festival, and then the very first issue had Orbius Valanthru on the cover himself in all of his Beholder glory. So this was a little bit of a letdown as far as that goes, and unfortunately none of the remaining installments are shown on the cover either. Now this would be corrected with the 2 adventure paths that came after it, so Age of Worms and Savage Tide. I'm pretty sure all the issues of those the magazines that had the adventures for those adventure paths, I'm pretty sure they were all the subject of the covers of the magazine. But this was sort of a disappointing turn for me in particular, because I was actually, at the time, I was starting to get worried that they thought that this was sort of a flop or a failure, and they weren't trying to push it so much anymore by having the artwork on the cover to really promote the adventure path, and I was worried that they were just trying to get through it so that they could move on and never touch that kind of concept again. Thankfully, I was wrong, but at the time, I just had no way of knowing that. So, if you're a little bit confused as to why the next few covers are going to have nothing to do with the adventures that I discuss, that is essentially why. But this was a great adventure, a great installment, and a bad sign of things to come in terms of how things are going to escalate moving forward. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you played through this adventure path, let me know. I'd love to hear your memories of Lords of Oblivion and your memories of Volanthru or the giant fight in Ravati's mansion, if your group actually ended up doing that. So thank you guys very much for watching. I look forward to all your wonderful comments, and I will see you next time. Take care.